The worst cages are the ones people stop noticing. The sign above the display glowed a soft corporate blue, bright enough to catch attention but gentle enough to avoid questions. Visitors passed beneath it every day without slowing down. Families carrying shopping bags. Freight captains on shore leave. Tourists from a dozen worlds looking for something unusual to photograph before their next jump across the sector. None of them seemed to find anything strange about the young alien woman sitting behind 12 inches of reinforced crystal. Lyra Voss had been inside that glass enclosure for 117 days. Not that anyone cared enough to count. The commercial promenade of Orion Gateway Station stretched nearly half a mile beneath a vaulted dome of transparent alloy. Beyond it, stars drifted across the darkness like scattered diamonds. Cargo shuttles moved silently between docking arms. Massive freighters hung motionless in the void. Everything looked beautiful from a distance. Everything usually did. Inside the enclosure, Lyra sat on a simple metallic bench positioned beneath white display lights. The illumination erased shadows from her face and made her pale blue skin appear almost artificial. Like a museum piece. Like something manufactured rather than born. A digital plaque floated beside the glass. Specimen 47A, Etherian female. Verified biological authenticity. Qualified for private acquisition. Every word had been carefully chosen. Not prisoner. Not person. Not citizen. Specimen. Acquisition. Merchandise wrapped in respectable language. Lyra kept her eyes lowered as another group approached the exhibit. She had learned long ago that meeting the gaze of strangers only encouraged them to stare longer. The children were the worst. Not because they were cruel. Because they were curious. Curious people asked questions. Curious people pointed. Curious people laughed when adults laughed. A small boy pressed both hands against the crystal. His face squashed flat against the transparent surface. Is she real? He asked. His mother barely looked up from her wrist display. Of course she's real, sweetheart. Can she understand us? The woman shrugged. Probably. The boy stared harder. Lyra remained motionless. The mother finally tugged him away toward another attraction farther down the corridor. Within seconds, they had forgotten her existence entirely. The station lights shifted from afternoon mode toward evening cycle. Warm amber hues replaced the clinical whites overhead. Music drifted through hidden speakers. Somewhere nearby, a restaurant opened its dinner service. The smell of grilled vegetables and sweet spices floated across the promenade. Lyra watched people gather around tables. Friends laughing together. Families sharing meals. Couples walking side by side. Simple things. Ordinary things. The kind of freedom that became invisible once you possessed it. A maintenance drone rolled past her enclosure. Its wheels hummed softly against polished flooring. Another followed behind, carrying replacement lighting panels. The station never stopped moving. Never stopped earning. Never stopped selling. Across the concourse, a giant holographic advertisement flickered to life. The image of a smiling executive appeared 20 feet tall above the crowd. Tomorrow night, the announcement proclaimed cheerfully. The Orion Elite Acquisition Event presents one of the rarest opportunities in station history. Beneath the message, auction details scrolled in golden letters. Luxury accommodations. Rare artifacts. Biological acquisitions. Premium contracts. Attendance by invitation only. Several passers-by slowed to watch. Some exchanged interested looks. Others smiled. One man even checked the countdown timer on his datapad. Less than 24 hours remained. Lyra turned away from the display and looked toward the stars beyond the dome. She had once spent entire nights studying those stars through observatory telescopes back home. She remembered classrooms filled with young students. Questions about astronomy. Laughter. Lessons. Dreams. Memories felt dangerous now. Memories reminded people of what they had lost. A faint crack appeared in the reflection before her as station lights shifted again. For a brief moment, she caught sight of herself in the crystal. Silver hair. Violet eyes. Tired shoulders. A woman. Reduced to a label and a price tag. The crowd continued flowing around her enclosure like water around a stone. Nobody stopped. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked why a living person sat behind glass while the galaxy walked by pretending everything was normal. And somewhere deep within Orion Gateway Station, hidden behind locked corporate doors, preparations for tomorrow's auction continued without interruption. Most people never notice the people who keep a station alive. That was exactly how Ethan Carter liked it. At 6'1", wearing a gray maintenance jacket stained with coolant residue and carrying a toolbox that weighed nearly 40 pounds, he blended into Orion Gateway Station better than most of the decorative plants lining the promenade. The station trusted him with power grids, environmental systems, and emergency backups worth billions of credits. Yet most travelers never looked twice at him. Ethan preferred it that way. He stepped out of a maintenance lift just after 7 in the morning as the artificial sunrise cycle washed the corridor in soft gold light. A service tablet rested beneath his arm, displaying a growing list of equipment failures. 3 faulty air recyclers, 2 overloaded junction relays, 1 cooling pump threatening to shut down an entire docking arm. Normal problems. Predictable problems. The kind he could solve. Human beings like to think the galaxy ran on politics, military fleets, and powerful corporations. Ethan knew better. The galaxy ran on people replacing worn-out filters at 3 in the morning. As he crossed the central promenade, a familiar crowd had already gathered around the glass enclosure. Some visitors held steaming cups of coffee. Others snapped pictures. The exhibit had become part of the station's scenery. Like a fountain. Like a sculpture. Ethan slowed his pace without meaning to. He found himself looking toward the enclosure. Toward the woman inside. Lyra sat exactly where she had been the previous evening. White station lights reflected against the crystal walls surrounding her. She looked smaller somehow during daylight hours. More isolated. A maintenance alert chimed from Ethan's tablet. He ignored it. For a moment, 2 teenage tourists stood near the display. One read the floating information panel aloud. Verified biological authenticity, he said with a laugh. What does that even mean? His friend shrugged. Maybe they have fake ones too. They moved on. Neither bothered looking at Lyra directly. Ethan frowned. Something about the wording on the display bothered him. Not because it was unusual, because it sounded familiar. Corporate language always worked the same way. If you changed enough words, people stopped asking difficult questions. He approached the enclosure slowly. The digital plaque rotated through promotional information. Auction countdown. Genetic classification. Ownership verification. Every sentence sounded polished. Professional. Empty. Then he saw it. Near the bottom of the scrolling text. A small notation hidden beneath several legal disclaimers. Property transfer authorization approved under Commerce Statute 88C. Ethan blinked. Commerce Statute? That made no sense. Living beings were protected under interstellar citizenship agreements. At least they were supposed to be. He leaned closer. The fine print vanished before he could finish reading. The display refreshed automatically. New advertisements appeared. New legal language. The notation disappeared. A strange feeling settled into his stomach. Not anger. Not yet. More like the sensation of discovering a loose bolt inside a machine that should not have one. Something small. Something easy to miss. Something that could eventually bring the entire system down. Inside the enclosure, Lyra lifted her gaze for the first time that morning. Their eyes met across the crystal barrier. Violet against blue-gray. Neither spoke. Neither smiled. The moment lasted only seconds before a group of visitors stepped between them. When the crowd moved on, she was looking away again. Ethan stood there longer than he intended. Finally, another maintenance alert sounded. Docking arm 12. Cooling system failure risk. Real work. Actual responsibilities. He exhaled and turned toward the service corridor. Yet as he walked away, the words from the display remained lodged in his thoughts. Property transfer. Authorization. Commerce Statute 88C. By the time the maintenance door closed behind him, Ethan Carter had already made a decision. The first thing he was going to repair today was not a cooling pump. It was finding out why a living person was being listed as property on a station he helped keep running. Information had a smell. Ethan had learned that years ago. Not a literal smell. More like the stale feeling hidden inside records that somebody hoped would never be examined too closely. By late afternoon, he sat alone inside Maintenance Sector 4, surrounded by humming server cabinets and the constant whisper of cooling fans. The station's primary data archive stretched across 3 floors beneath him. Millions of files. Millions of transactions. Most people saw databases as organized collections of facts. Ethan knew they were collections of choices. Someone decided what to record. Someone decided what to hide. The glow from his terminal painted pale blue reflections across the steel walls as he entered another authorization code. His maintenance credentials granted access to infrastructure systems, not legal records. Normally, that would have stopped him. Normally, he would have respected the boundary. But every time he remembered the words property transfer authorization, something inside him refused to let it go. The search results appeared. Commerce Statute 88C. Ethan frowned. He had never heard of it before. That alone was unusual. Station regulations changed constantly, but major commercial statutes were common knowledge among contractors. He opened the file. A wall of legal language filled the screen. Definitions, exceptions, subsections, corporate amendments. His eyes moved quickly through the text. Then he found the clause, the loophole. A cold sensation settled into his chest. The statute did not classify living beings as property. That would have been illegal. Instead, it classified certain individuals as disputed biological assets whenever citizenship records could not be independently verified. Disputed biological assets. Ethan stared at the phrase. Whoever had written it deserved an award for creative dishonesty. The law transformed people into inventory simply by changing the label attached to them. He opened another file, then another. Transfer approvals, ownership certifications, auction authorizations. Every document traced back to the same corporate consortium operating the station's luxury acquisition events. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. None of the files contained criminal convictions. None contained evidence of wrongdoing. Most contained missing records, lost paperwork, administrative disputes, technicalities, entire lives reduced to clerical ambiguity. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face. Outside his office door, a maintenance cart rolled down the corridor. Somebody laughed in the distance. The station continued functioning normally, while something profoundly wrong hid inside its foundations. A notification suddenly appeared on his screen. Subject File 47A. His pulse quickened. He opened it immediately. A photograph appeared. Lyra stood beneath brighter lights than the ones inside her enclosure. The image had clearly been taken months earlier. Before the exhaustion. Before the isolation. She looked younger somehow. Not because of age. Because hope had not yet been worn away from her expression. Ethan continued reading. Species, Etherian. Occupation, educational instructor. Homeworld, Alaris colony. He blinked. Educational instructor. A teacher. Not royalty. Not a criminal. Not a political extremist. A teacher. The file continued. Citizenship records unavailable following administrative dissolution of Alaris Colonial Registry. Temporary legal status pending review. Asset transfer approved. Ethan leaned back slowly. Administrative dissolution. More polished language. More convenient wording. Somewhere an office had closed. Somewhere records had disappeared. Somewhere paperwork had been lost. And somehow that had become enough justification to place a woman behind glass and schedule her for auction. His eyes drifted toward the station schematic displayed on a secondary monitor. Thousands of passengers move through Orion Gateway every day. Thousands of ordinary people. Most would never know any of this existed. Most would walk past that enclosure tomorrow and assume somebody else had already verified everything was legal. Somebody else had already asked the necessary questions. Somebody else had already decided it was acceptable. Ethan looked once more at Lyra's photograph, then at the countdown timer attached to her file. 20 hours. Less than a day remained before the auction began. The cooling fans continued their steady hum around him. The servers continued processing transactions worth billions of credits. Yet for the first time since arriving on Orion Gateway, Ethan Carter found himself unable to focus on a single maintenance report. Because now he knew the truth. And the truth had become impossible to walk away from. Some machines failed loudly. Others failed so quietly that people called the damage policy. Ethan spent the next 3 hours trying to convince himself there was still a reasonable explanation hidden somewhere inside the records. There was not. By the time station evenings settled across Orion Gateway, he had reviewed enough files to understand the pattern. Every disputed biological asset followed the same path. Missing paperwork. Temporary classification. Commercial transfer. Auction. The process was clean, efficient, and perfectly legal. That was the part he hated most. Illegal things could be stopped. Illegal things had obvious enemies. This system had contracts, signatures, and compliance officers. It had become respectable. The central administration offices occupied one of the station's upper levels beneath a curved ceiling of polished silver alloy. Soft lighting reflected from decorative water features designed to make visitors feel calm. Ethan stood at the reception desk, holding a data tablet loaded with evidence. Behind the counter, a well-dressed administrator offered a professional smile that never reached his eyes. "How may I assist you today, Mr. Carter?" Ethan placed the tablet on the desk. "I need clarification regarding Asset 47 Alpha." The administrator's expression barely changed. A commercial matter. You would need acquisition services. I already reviewed acquisition services. Ethan tapped the screen. This individual was a schoolteacher. There are no criminal charges. No legal convictions. No public hearing. How exactly was this approved? The administrator glanced at the file for less than 2 seconds. The classification was reviewed under Commerce Statute 88C. I know that. Ethan kept his voice calm. I am asking why. The administrator folded his hands. The citizenship records could not be verified because an entire colony registry collapsed. That is unfortunate. Ethan stared at him. Unfortunate. Mr. Carter, these decisions were made through established legal channels. The man slid the tablet back across the counter. Everything appears compliant. Compliant. Another polished word. Another clean label. Ethan picked up the tablet and left before his frustration showed on his face. The promenade felt different now. Not because it had changed. Because he had. Music still drifted through hidden speakers. Restaurants remained crowded. Travelers laughed over drinks and vacation plans. Yet every cheerful sound seemed strangely distant. He walked toward the enclosure again. Toward the place he could no longer ignore. Evening crowds had thickened around the attraction. A large holographic display hovered above the crystal structure. 20 hours had become 16. The countdown continued, shrinking 1 second at a time. Visitors discussed estimated bidding prices as casually as sports scores. Ethan stopped several feet away. Inside the enclosure, Lyra sat near the glass with a small data slate resting on her lap. The device appeared inactive. Maybe it was. Maybe she simply wanted something to hold. For a moment, he wondered what she had been thinking during those 117 days. Had she counted the hours? Had she stopped counting? Had she believed somebody would eventually notice the truth? A pair of station security officers walked past without looking inside. That bothered him more than anything else. Not cruelty. Indifference. Cruelty at least acknowledged a person's existence. Indifference erased it completely. Lyra slowly lifted her eyes. Once again, their gazes met through the crystal barrier. This time, neither looked away immediately. Ethan noticed details he had missed before. The fatigue beneath her eyes. The careful posture of someone determined to preserve dignity even when nobody seemed willing to recognize it. Then something unexpected happened. She gave the smallest nod. Not a greeting. Not gratitude. Just recognition. As if she understood that he had finally seen what everyone else had chosen not to. Ethan stood there long after the crowd moved on. Above them, the auction countdown continued its steady descent toward tomorrow. And for the first time since arriving at Orion Gateway, he realized he was no longer investigating a problem. He was running out of time. The station became quieter after midnight. Not silent. Orion Gateway never truly slept. Somewhere, cargo loaders still hummed. Somewhere, life support systems continued circulating air through hundreds of miles of corridors. Somewhere, travelers arrived from distant worlds carrying hopes, worries, and destinations. But the crowds disappeared. The noise softened. And for the first time all day, Ethan found himself standing alone in front of the enclosure. The countdown above the crystal structure showed less than 12 hours remaining. The promotional displays had dimmed for the night cycle, leaving only soft white lighting around the exhibit. Shadows stretched across the promenade. Reflections from distant stars shimmered against the glass walls. Lyra sat awake. She always seemed awake. Ethan wondered when she had last experienced a night without people watching her. He approached slowly until he stood a few feet from the enclosure. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The station ventilation system released a faint rush of air overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a transport announcement echoed through nearly empty corridors. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. I read your file. The words felt inadequate the moment they left his mouth. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Then you know more about me than most people here. Her voice surprised him. Calm. Steady. Not bitter. Not defeated. Just tired. You were a teacher. A faint expression crossed her face. It almost looked like surprise. I was. Science. She nodded. Astronomy. Mostly children between 10 and 14 years. Oh. Ethan glanced toward the stars visible through the dome overhead. That sounds better than repairing cooling systems. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. The smallest hint of a smile. It vanished almost immediately. You would be surprised how often children accidentally destroy expensive equipment. Ethan laughed softly before realizing it was the first time he had heard either of them laugh. The sound felt strangely out of place here. Then the silence returned. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Lyra looked through the crystal barrier separating them. Did you find what you were looking for? Ethan thought about the files, the loopholes, the signatures, the administrators hiding behind policy. No, he admitted. I found something worse. She studied his face carefully. Most people stop looking once they realize everything is technically legal. Legal does not always mean right. For a moment, neither moved. The station lights reflected across the glass between them. Ethan hated that barrier. Hated how it distorted her reflection. Hated how normal everyone seemed to think it was. Lyra lowered her gaze briefly before speaking again. You know what the strange part is? What? The cage is not the hardest thing. Ethan frowned. Then what is? She looked past him toward the empty promenade. Toward the shops. The restaurants. The corridors where thousands passed every day. Being seen, she said quietly. People look at me constantly. They photograph me. They read the display. They discuss prices. Her fingers rested lightly against the bench beside her. But they do not actually see me. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Because he understood exactly what she meant. The enclosure was not designed only to contain a person. It was designed to redefine one. To transform a teacher into a product. A citizen into inventory. A human being into background decoration. Lyra's violet eyes met his again. If your species had found me first, she asked softly, would I still be in a cage? The question settled between them like gravity. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Because she was not asking about paperwork. She was not asking about laws. She was asking whether someone would have remembered she was a person before they remembered she was valuable. The stars drifted slowly beyond the dome overhead. The countdown continued, falling 1 second at a time. And standing there beneath the station lights, Ethan realized he no longer cared about regulations, contracts, or corporate approvals. He only knew one thing. Tomorrow, if nothing changed, the galaxy would prove Lyra's question had the wrong answer. Morning arrived with the artificial precision of station programming. Lights brightened by measured increments. Music returned to the commercial promenade. Advertisements awakened one by one across towering displays. Orion Gateway prepared itself for another profitable day. Ethan Carter had not slept. He sat alone in a maintenance office staring at 2 messages displayed on his terminal. The first came from station administration. It was brief and polite. His performance reviews were excellent. His contract renewal had been approved. A promotion package awaited final confirmation. Better pay, better quarters, less time crawling through access tunnels and maintenance shafts. The second message arrived 30 minutes later from acquisition services. Attendance was requested at the evening auction as technical support staff. Premium compensation included. Ethan stared at both notices in silence. The timing felt almost deliberate, as if the station itself had placed 2 futures side by side and asked him to choose. Outside the office window, cargo ships drifted slowly beyond the docking arms. Their navigation lights blinked against the darkness like distant stars. For years, Ethan had worked toward stability. Good contracts. Reliable income. A future that did not depend on luck. Everything he wanted sat only a signature away. All he had to do was stop asking questions. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Another message. This one from his supervisor. Congratulations on the promotion. Well deserved. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Well deserved. The words should have felt good. Instead, they felt strangely heavy. He closed the terminal and headed toward the central promenade. The station seemed more crowded than ever. Wealthy visitors had arrived throughout the night. Luxury transports occupied the premium docking berths. Elegant travelers moved through the concourse wearing formal clothing designed to impress strangers. Conversations drifted through the air. Rare acquisitions. Exclusive opportunities. Investment potential. Nobody spoke about people. Only assets. Ethan stopped near the enclosure. Security barriers had been expanded around the display in preparation for the evening event. Additional lighting illuminated the crystal walls. Everything looked cleaner. More expensive. More respectable. Lyra sat where she always sat. Yet something about her expression had changed. Not hope. Not fear. Acceptance. The kind that appeared when a person became exhausted from expecting help. Ethan hated seeing it. He stepped closer. Their eyes met. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Lyra glanced toward the growing crowd. Looks busy today, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. It does. Her gaze drifted toward the countdown timer. Less than 6 hours remained. People always seem excited when they think they are about to own something valuable. Ethan looked at the floor. He wished he had an answer that would make any of this better. Instead, he asked the only honest question he could think of. How are you staying so calm? Lyra considered that for a moment. I spent my life teaching children about stars. She looked upward toward the transparent dome high above the station. When you study the universe long enough, you learn that fear changes very little. Her eyes returned to his. What matters is what people choose while they are afraid. The words followed Ethan long after he walked away. Through maintenance corridors. Through service elevators. Through every level of Orion Gateway. What matters is what people choose while they are afraid. By late afternoon, the decision he had been avoiding finally became impossible to ignore. If he stayed silent, his future remained secure. If he acted, everything he had built could disappear. His career, his reputation, his place on the station. The auction would begin in only a few hours. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter realized that doing nothing was also a choice. The auction began at precisely 7 o'clock station time. Orion Gateway loved precision. Precision looked professional. Precision reassured investors. Precision made uncomfortable things feel respectable. The Grand Acquisition Hall occupied the highest level of the commercial district beneath a ceiling of transparent crystal nearly 60 feet overhead. Stars glimmered beyond it. Hundreds of guests filled the tiered seating areas. Wealthy collectors, corporate representatives, private investors. Their conversations blended into a low hum of anticipation. Soft music drifted through hidden speakers, while holographic displays rotated through upcoming lots. Rare artifacts, historical documents, exotic biological specimens. Everything had a number. Everything had a value. Ethan stood alone inside a maintenance access corridor overlooking the hall through a narrow observation window. His station credentials hung from his belt. His promotion contract remained unopened inside his locker 3 levels below. The decision had already been made. He simply had not admitted it until now. Through the glass, he could see the enclosure positioned at the center of the stage. Bright lights surrounded it. Cameras floated silently nearby. The crowd watched with eager attention. Lyra sat inside exactly as she had every day before. Calm, composed, dignified. The countdown timer reached 0. Applause echoed through the hall. Ethan looked down at the service tablet in his hands. A single command window remained open. Station infrastructure access. Emergency override authorization. He had spent the last 2 hours preparing. Cross-checking systems. Mapping dependencies. Studying every relay and backup circuit connected to the commercial district. He was an engineer. Engineers solve problems. Tonight the problem was simply larger than usual. A cheerful voice filled the auction hall. Welcome, distinguished guests. Thank you for attending Orion Gateway's premier acquisition event. More applause followed. Ethan's thumb hovered above the confirmation icon. One command. One decision. After that, there would be no promotion. No explanations. No second chances. Security investigations would follow. Contracts would disappear. His career on the station would effectively end. The realization should have frightened him. Instead, he remembered a question. If your species had found me first, would I still be in a cage? Ethan closed his eyes for a second. Then he pressed confirm. Deep beneath Orion Gateway, power management systems immediately began executing a cascade of emergency protocols. The effect was subtle at first. Decorative lighting flickered once. Holographic advertisements vanished. Several display panels went dark. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Then the station's commercial power grid shut itself down completely. The transformation was instant. The enormous hall plunged into darkness before emergency lighting activated. Soft red illumination replaced the bright stage lights. Auction terminals disconnected. Bidding networks vanished. Transaction servers dropped offline. Every digital authorization linked to the event disappeared simultaneously. Across the hall, guests stared at blank screens in disbelief. The host's amplified voice vanished mid-sentence. Security personnel scrambled to understand what had happened. Ethan watched the confusion unfold through the observation window. No alarms screamed. No explosions occurred. No dramatic destruction followed. Just silence. The kind of silence that appears when a machine suddenly stops pretending it is healthy. Below, emergency protocols continued spreading through the system exactly as designed. Without active transaction servers, ownership transfers could not proceed. Without verification networks, bidding became impossible. Without commercial authorization infrastructure, the event legally ceased to exist. The auction was not interrupted. It was erased. Ethan exhaled slowly. The stars remained visible through the crystal ceiling overhead. The crowd looked smaller now somehow. Less powerful. Less certain. At the center of the hall, Lyra stood for the first time. Not because anyone ordered her to. Because for the first time all evening, nobody was discussing her price. The first reaction was confusion. The second was panic. The third was truth. Emergency lights cast the acquisition hall in muted shades of red as technicians rushed between terminals that no longer responded. Investors stared at blank screens. Legal representatives argued with station personnel. Security teams demanded status reports that nobody seemed able to provide. The entire machine had stopped, and suddenly everyone could see how dependent they had been on it. Ethan remained inside the observation corridor watching the scene unfold below. His tablet flashed with incoming alerts. Unauthorized system intervention detected. Administrative review initiated. Access privileges suspended. One message after another appeared across the screen. He ignored all of them. None of it mattered now. What mattered was happening on the stage. The crystal enclosure remained illuminated by emergency power. Without the surrounding advertisements and promotional displays, it looked different. Smaller. Sadder. Less like an attraction and more like what it had always been. A cage. For the first time, many people in the hall seemed to notice that. Conversations shifted. Questions spread. Reporters who had arrived to cover a prestigious commercial event began recording something else entirely. A woman behind glass. A halted auction. A crowd suddenly forced to explain itself. Down on the main floor, Lyra stood quietly while station officials argued around her. Nobody addressed her directly. Nobody asked what she wanted. Yet something had changed. The attention no longer focused on her value. It focused on her situation. And that difference was enormous. Ethan left the observation corridor and descended toward the hall. He expected security officers to stop him. Surprisingly, nobody did. The station had become too busy managing the fallout. By the time he reached the main level, legal advisors were already debating whether the event could be rescheduled. Others argued it could not. The commercial chain of authorization had been broken. Documentation had been corrupted by the emergency shutdown. Every ownership transfer attached to the event was now under review. The system had protected itself so aggressively that it had erased its own certainty. Ethan almost smiled at the irony. Near the enclosure, he found himself standing only a few feet from Lyra once again. The crystal barrier still separated them. Yet somehow it felt weaker than before. Less important. Lyra looked at him through the transparent wall. She understood immediately. Not how. Not every detail. But enough. Her eyes moved briefly toward the warning notifications flashing across his tablet. Then back to his face. You did this. It was not a question. Ethan exhaled slowly. The station did it to itself. For a moment, she simply looked at him. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed. Softly. Not because anything was funny. Because after 117 days of being treated like an object, the absurdity of the situation had finally become impossible to ignore. The sound caught Ethan completely off guard. What? He asked. Lyra shook her head slightly. I spent months believing someone powerful would eventually save me. Her gaze drifted around the hall. Wealthy investors. Corporate executives. Administrators. Lawyers. Instead, it was a maintenance engineer. Ethan looked away, embarrassed by the attention. I only turned off a few systems. No. Her voice remained gentle. You remembered I was a person. The noise of the hall continued around them. Arguments. Announcements. Investigations. Yet Ethan barely heard any of it. Because in that moment he finally understood something important. Lyra was not a hidden princess. Not a secret billionaire. Not a political figure waiting to reward her rescuer. She was exactly what her file had said. A teacher. An ordinary woman whose life had been buried beneath paperwork and indifference. And somehow that made everything more important, not less. 1 year later, the first thing Ethan noticed was the sound. Not machinery. Not station announcements. Not the endless hum of commercial traffic. Laughter. Dozens of young voices carried through the open windows of a modest school building overlooking a quiet coastline on Alaris Colony. Sunlight reflected across the water beyond the cliffs. White clouds drifted slowly through a blue sky untouched by station ceilings or artificial lighting grids. The universe felt larger here. More honest. Ethan stood at the entrance holding a small travel bag over one shoulder. His maintenance career on Orion Gateway had ended exactly as expected. Investigations followed. Contracts disappeared. Promotions vanished. Nobody ever officially thanked him. Nobody ever officially blamed him either. The station preferred to describe the incident as a systems anomaly. Corporations had a habit of rewriting uncomfortable stories. He smiled slightly at the thought. Some things never changed. Children's voices echoed from inside the building. Curious, energetic, alive. Through the doorway, he could see classrooms filled with students from several different worlds. Human children sat beside alien children. Some worked on astronomy projects. Others studied navigation charts pinned to the walls. The room felt messy in the way meaningful places often did. Real learning left evidence behind. Ethan stepped inside. The scent of paper, electronics, and fresh paint filled the air. Along one hallway, student artwork covered nearly every available surface. Pictures of stars, planets, spacecraft, families, dreams. He stopped when he reached a framed photograph hanging near the center of the corridor. The image showed a shattered crystal enclosure sitting inside a darkened hall. Beneath it, a simple plaque carried a single sentence. The day someone remembered I was a person. Ethan stared at the words quietly. Footsteps approached from behind. He already recognized them. I was wondering how long you would stand there. He turned. Lyra smiled. Not the careful smile she had worn on the station. Not the exhausted one that appeared after surviving too much for too long. This smile reached her eyes. The difference was remarkable. She looked healthier, stronger, more present somehow. Life had returned to places where fatigue once lived. Ethan glanced toward the photograph. You put that on the wall? The students insisted. Her expression softened. They said stories matter. Together they walked toward the windows overlooking the ocean. Outside, children played beneath the afternoon sun. A group pointed excitedly toward the sky where a shuttle passed. Overhead, future pilots, future engineers, future teachers, future dreamers. The possibilities seemed endless. For a while neither spoke. They simply watched the horizon. Waves rolled against distant rocks. Seabirds drifted on coastal winds. Somewhere behind them, another burst of laughter echoed through the school. Finally, Lyra looked toward him. Do you regret it? Ethan understood the question immediately. The promotion, the career, the life he left behind. He considered it honestly, then shook his head. No. The answer came easier than he expected. Because some decisions become simpler with time. Not easier, just clearer. Lyra followed his gaze toward the children playing outside. Good, she said quietly. The afternoon sun painted gold across the water. Beyond the coastline, the stars waited in the daylight sky, invisible but still present. Ethan thought about Orion Gateway, about policies, about loopholes, about all the people who walked past a glass wall without truly seeing what stood behind it. Then he looked at the school filled with voices and possibility. One ordinary teacher, one ordinary engineer, no royalty, no hidden fortune, no reward waiting at the end of the story, just a choice made at the right moment. And sometimes, in a galaxy obsessed with power, that was enough.